Hi there and welcome to part 3 of this video series in how I fixed the handling of my Porsche Cayman 981 GT4. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, go check them out first, it will make a lot more sense. In this part 3 video, I road test the car after all the work that was done on the car to see if I can notice a difference. Enjoying life and cars to the max.
You can see now that they're both kind of in the same place.
Yep, I can see.
There's just a little bit of slot showing on the inboard, which means I've pulled it out, and there's the same amount of slot inboard on the opposite side.
There we go, so that's pretty
even from
symmetrical.
a common sense point of view, they're symmetrical.
There we go. Well, I think it's time we go for a drive.
I think so. So we're going to go and do the same evaluation drive that we did before we started. Same roads, same speeds, same lanes. If you saw the 987 video, you may remember the drive from back then. Nothing's changed, other than it's currently cold, wet and miserable. We're on brand new Michelin PS4S, so we're going to bail out of doing the roundabout test for obvious reasons. But the first test that we did this morning was dead simple, dead straight bit of road, very, very little camber, and with the car positioned in the middle of the road with the steering wheel straight, as per any car, I would expect the car to go in a straight line. Before, it very, very, very slowly crept to the right, where now she's nice and straight. So it's passed the first test. If the car, for any reason, didn't pass that test, we would turn around and we'd be going straight back in, start all over again.
Wow. Does that ever happen out of interest? Or?
Not very often, unless we've got curveball, you know, a dodgy tyre,
yeah.
Or something's gone awry with a measurement. It very rarely happens. But a straight steering wheel, the steering wheel being level, is actually just a byproduct of the alignment being correct. If everything else is perfect, the steering wheel actually ends up being level.
The bit that always catches me out is in the UK, you're never on a perfectly level bit of tarmac.
Correct.
So you know the camber on these road surfaces. Do you only expect the car to travel in a straight line on certain sections of this route that we're taking?
So the first bit of road that we're going to drive is what we would class as a typical British dual carriageway, which hopefully will be demonstrated today because it's raining. Most British dual carriageways are cambered to the left hand side so that rainwater can drain off to the side. So given the amount of negative camber that you're wearing and the amount of camber that the road has, on a left cambered road I would expect this car to tend to the left by a certain amount. So we're going to go and prove that now. Likewise, if we put the car on a right hand camber, so if you were driving on the continent, it should equally go right by the same amount.
Yeah.
So as we get round this ever so slight left hand bend, you should be able to see today, because there might be puddles, the road will taper off to the left, and if I put the car in the middle of the carriageway with the steering wheel straight, the car should just tend very, very slowly to the left. So as we go down the dip, and I've just got my thumbs in the loops, I'm not preventing it, slowly, slowly, off she goes to the left.
Yeah.
But it's just a thumb's pressure to prevent that. It's not a pull. Where when we did this test before, the car was really hesitant to go left because it had got that right bias in it.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to be honest here and just say, you've driven these roads in so many cars of similar make and model that you know what you should be looking for.
Correct.
The fact that I didn't actually realise the car was that out of whack, it just kind of goes to show me that unless I bring the car to you, because this is a used car, I never bought the car new, I just took the used car as it was good enough for me. So
so now this road is now right cambered, so rainwater collects on our right, and you'll notice that it goes to the right by the same amount. Where when we did this test at lunchtime, the car went right very, very quickly.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, because so based on those two cambers, this is equally going to the right and that was equally going to the left.
Correct.
Right.
And now when we accelerate, because that thrust angle is right down the middle, the car is arrow straight. absolutely arrow straight. Now what I don't want to do is I don't want to say too much about what I think this car feels like, because we are going to hand over shortly, and I don't want this to be a placebo effect exercise. If I tell you what I think this car feels like, and you've seen all those numbers on the screen, there's a real strong possibility that you're going to just want to agree with me, because you've seen it change, and then I tell you that it's different, and you want it to be different. But that is straight as you like now.
That, just watching that, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to, but the thrust angle was only out 0.04.
Very small amount, it's
very
still
small
within
amount,
tolerance.
but it made the car drifted.
To the right before. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's going to be a placebo effect. I didn't even know there's anything wrong with the car. So the reason why I'm a bit hesitant to even see if I pick up any differences is that if I didn't know it was out, how am I going to know it's in? You know, I need to take it on the roads that I guess
Correct.
drive on.
And we always ask, because we're not treating you any different to any other client. So we go through this process with all of our customers. In all cars, as long as they're road legal, they all do exactly the same tests on exactly the same roads, exactly the same speeds. We can then compare your car to every other car, and you would be surprised how many people will say exactly the same as yourself. I don't think I'm going to notice a difference. But if I had £1 for every customer that said that, I don't think I'd have to sell geometry very often anymore.
But, you know, it's a really good point. Do you know how many other geometry shops actually drive the car? Because if you just go based on the green levels printouts, you wouldn't get the experience that you get from driving many different iterations of this car.
Correct. The other thing to consider as well is that when we give you a car back, we tailor the car to how you want the car to feel. So we're not just interested in getting the car in the green. If you were using this car predominantly for circuit use, but it was still road registered, so you wanted to drive it to Spa, do Spa, and then drive it home from Spa, all of that paperwork that we saw back at the workshop would be red. But the car should still be able to fulfill this requirement of being able to drive at the speed limit on British roads in a straight line.
Now, you've just driven that section, Pete, and while you were talking, I was paying attention to the car. I felt, and this is not placebo, I felt the car was a bit busy and you had to move the steering wheel quite a bit to keep us on that road. I was watching what you're doing with the wheel on that section, and it just seemed that you weren't fighting as much. Now, don't let me put words in your mouth, that's just what I saw.
Correct.
Did you notice any difference on that?
The car was much more stable, much less fidgety. So it's a GT4, it will dance, but it should never be pulled off course. The car should always be straight and true. So for the same speed, given the fact that it's now raining and before it wasn't, the car is much easier to keep in a straight line when the road gets more upstep.
So previously when you had to kind of fight a bit on that section of road, what was that fight comprised of? Was it like camber fighting with cars to the left?
Many things, all sorts of things. You'd got the difference in the cambers, predominantly the front cambers being so asymmetric. As soon as the front right wheel hit a bump, front left wheel hit a bump. Now remember, the front left wheel is in the bad part of the road. Because of that asymmetry in the camber, it would laterally push the front of the car sideways, which then kicks the steering wheel. So before, we'd be driving down that road, and as soon as it hit a bump, we'd always have to counter-correct it to keep the car in a straight line.
See, I just thought that's just because GT4s are more darty, and that's something that goes with
the territory.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to drive it now, and we'll see what you think.
Will I notice a difference? I have no idea.
Well, remember, the thing is, we've opted for setting your car up for road sport use.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee British weather. It is more likely to be like this than it is to be 30 degrees and sunny. I actually quite like the fact that the weather's like this, because if you can drive it confidently on a day like today, you should be able to drive it confidently anywhere. So at the top of this T-junction, we're going to take a left, and this will put us onto a reasonably quick section of typical British A road. You know, nice twisty bit of A road.
You know what you were talking about, it takes about 100 miles to scrub in a new set of tyres?
Yes.
Is that just from a grip perspective, or is there anything more to it in terms of like the compliancy of the material? And
there's two things really. The first is the
straight on.
The first is that when a tyre comes out of its mould, it has a releasing agent on it to allow the tyre to come out of the mould, and it takes sort of between 50 and 100 miles for that kind of silicon-based compound to get scrubbed off the tyre.
Didn't know that.
The other thing to consider as well is that certainly cars like this that have got lots of negative camber, tyres, the Michelins are slightly different, but tyres as a general rule are quite square. So if you then put them on a car that's got lots of negative camber, they take a little while to take up the shape of the geometry. So you need to be able to scrub it into the angle that they're going to be presented at the ground. So it's normally about 100 miles or so.
So tell me if this sounds weird. The first thing I notice, obviously this car's got electrically assisted steering, when my 987 had hydraulic steering. I find that how do I say, it feels, it just feels firmer in the steering wheel.
Firmer.
Like, it was quite,
it's a bit more effort.
Yeah.
So
like what?
That's the track width and the caster that's given you that. So one of the side effects of caster is it increases the self-centering force. So as soon as you turn off dead ahead, that extra shim in the lower arm, which has now increased your track and your caster, is putting a force back into the steering wheel to put it back to dead ahead.
Wow. Like,
so the car should be super stable.
What is a big thing for me is steering inputs around the centre point. You know, motorway mileage, you know, very small inputs around the centre point. And I love the weight. It feels like a completely different front end. I swear, like that weighted, yeah, like it wants to go back, yeah. And that's what the shim would do.
That's what the shim would do. So whilst on paper you're still wearing stock 981 GT4 geometry, it's the way in which we've achieved those settings which have given us that steering feel.
That's beautiful. Like, and yeah, it does seem like it's not jumping around. So the roads are still the same roads.
The same roads, but the car is less effort.
Yeah.
Which means you can relax.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the quickest way down typical British roads, which are poor, is in a car which is confident.
So all that time, like, you know, when I'm going over rough surfaces, and there's a lot of this input, keep it going straight. That was just bad geometry. Bad geometry.
Well, what we are going to do, because I'm really interested to get your feedback and your own words, is in a moment we're going to turn off this road, which is quite smooth. You know, it's a nice section of A road. We're going to turn off this road, and we're going to go back down a broken section of B road, where the road gets a bit more choppy, a bit more undulating, still quite straight, but much worse condition. And we'll see what you think when the road gets a bit more of a bully.
Like, I haven't done like any sharp. I think I've done one corner just to get onto this road. But my main takeaway is just how stable the steering is driving on these roads. It's almost like we're working together.
Yeah,
like
not having to fight.
We were fighting each other, and now we're together.
So we're going to take the next left.
Wow.
You see a little filter lane on the left-hand side. So this is going to take us back down a similar section of B road to that one that I drove up, where you noticed the steering. And you noticed the steering as a passenger.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what you think as a driver.
You know, like, what I don't understand, even when the car's getting bumped around a bit, it's not like the car goes off in that direction. It's almost like it self-corrects.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Now, given that you don't know these roads, and it's bumpy, and it's wet, and it's raining, would you believe the speed you're doing?
I just checked it now. So I always thought part of the GT4 characteristic was you need to be paying attention at all times, because, you know, you have to really grab that beast by the neck. But this is like, turns it into a docile animal, but not in terms of the in terms of the handling of the car. It just means that
it's not lost its GT4-ness. It's
not
just
at all.
more pleasant to drive.
It made me realise. I think that the car was quite busy, but I thought that was what
part
a GT4.
of the GT4.
Yeah.
And that's what most people think, because they don't know any different. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to have anything else to compare it to. You know, your previous car wasn't a GT car, whilst it had got some GT bits on it because of the mods that you'd done. So when you get into a GT car, you sometimes have a preconception of what you might expect it to feel like, and you don't know any better. And
to be to be really honest, I'm not exactly a racing driver. I don't know what a sports car should feel like. I guess getting into the GT4 from my 987, okay, the engine, the sound, the exhaust, the power, but I just wouldn't have thought the handling could be like this, which is. But just to be clear, when this car leaves the factory, it's still not set up like this, because we've increased the front track width, haven't we?
Correct.
So are we, in terms of the front width and the rear widths, are they almost the same, or? Almost the same.
Obviously the rear tyres are physically wider. We're never going to change that without physically changing wheels and tyres. But it puts the front wheels more in the same kind of lorry ruts as what the rear wheels are in. So it makes the whole car squarer, where previously the front of the car was narrow, the rear of the car was wide, and all of the negatives that go with that as a handling point of view.
I'm going to be honest, Pete, when you were talking about shims and I was underneath the car, I was a bit like, well,
why is he doing that?
He knows what he's doing. I'm just going to keep quiet because I'm not the expert. But I always thought shims are for people that want race setup. And I did say that I'm not going to track this car. It's more for A and B roads, but you still put in the shims, and I'm like, I'll let the guys do what they want. I'll be brutally honest. But if you're telling me the shims are aiding this recovery to the center position, I love that.
Yeah.
The whole, it wants to go straight. You know, I turn the wheel and I let go,
left.
and it
goes back.
It goes back to the That's just amazing.
But it's things like that that will give you the confidence at speed, you see, where before the car might have felt, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we'll use words like darty or fidgety, and you're quite right, you know, maybe some of that is the GT4 thing, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
If you want to use the car for how you've asked me to use the car, then why not have that kind of steering feel?
Yeah.
Because it will give you the confidence that it's going to do what you ask it to do. But when you don't want it to do that, it's pleasant, because it's got that.
It's beautiful.
It's got that kind of weight to it now.
I can honestly say, we didn't film this bit. Pete said, I'm going to drive the car, then you're going to drive it. And I was like, you know what, don't bother. I didn't know there was anything wrong with the car, so I'm not even going to bother to drive it. But Pete's like, no.
You didn't think you'd notice a difference?
Yeah, honestly, I was like, well, I take your word for it. I won't notice a difference, but hey, I trust you guys and everything's good. But I don't even know these roads, but I know how the car used to handle, and we're not even doing anything at speed here. It's just the fact that you've just tamed the bull. I mean, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess the case in point is that we're able to drive on roads you don't know, in the rain, we're filming a video, we're having a conversation, and you're not having to concentrate as much on the drive.
So the thing about having a conversation, whenever I drive with my wife, I generally say I don't want to talk, because
you're having to concentrate.
And I thought that was part of the whole GT4 experience, is that you're really paying attention all the time. But this has totally transformed the car, like totally. And I think, and to be clear, I'm not saying you've transformed it into a track car, because I'm not going to track the car.
No.
It's just a pleasure to drive. It really is a pleasure. Like, I didn't think a GT4 could be like this.
And don't get me wrong, if you decided on the way home today you're going to have a cheeky little stop at Silverstone, of course the car will still be more than sufficient to do a couple of laps of Silverstone. It won't be as fast as a Cup car, it won't be as fast as a GT4 RS, but it would hold its own.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've done one track day on this. I'm not actually all about flat out top speed, but it's more about when you're taking corners, how does it feel? Do you feel in control? And the last thing I want to do is feel like I'm pushing the car beyond my capabilities or the car's capabilities. And in this case, it's always been my capabilities that give up first.
Yeah.
But I feel that it wasn't necessarily my lack of driving ability. I was spending so much time fighting the car that's what I thought was the limit of my capabilities.
Yes.
But now I feel the car is just a lot easier to control.
We'll take the next right. And given that we've now given you a car that is more confident and is easier to drive, and you're having to think about it less, the speed thing will start to come naturally. Because as we've just proven down that section of B road, you don't even realise how fast you're going.
Yeah.
Because the car doesn't feel fast anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it would just get unsettled, and then you kind of go, well, you don't want to be unsettling the car at speed on a bump in a corner.
Because you didn't know what it was going to do.
Yeah.
Now you do know what it's going to do. Not a lot.
And to be clear, I drove the car on my PS4S here and still had those issues. So it's not like the tyres have fixed any of these issues. Wow.
So we're going to come onto a roundabout. We need to go straight across, second exit.
I've got to say, it's... My wife did say, oh, you're going all that way for wheel alignment, but I don't think it's just wheel alignment that you guys offer. I think it's a much more holistic package. Like, you take the car out.
It's bespoke. So it's taking a car, it's taking your requirement, and it's giving you back something that you want. And the customer that I had in yesterday, he put it really quite well. He referred to it as buying a watch. So he uses lots of other outfits for lots of other bits of work. He's got a 996 GT3, and he comes to us for wheel alignment, the next left. And he said, it's like buying a watch. He says, I could go to a well-known designer brand and I could buy a watch from them, but they also make handbags, and they make jeans, and they make shoes, and they make flip-flops. He says, or I could go to somebody that just makes watches, because they're the best at making watches. And he referred to us as being the best at making wheel alignment. So whilst there's other people out there that can absolutely do what we can do, and there's no doubt about that, we've seen plenty of that kind of work.
Can I just drive it anywhere in the front?
Yeah. Just a bit further. That's it, that's fine. We only do this. So we like to think that we're pretty good at doing it.
I'd like to agree that I think you are pretty good at how long have you been doing this?
12 years.
Wow.
Doing all this, all day, every day, 6 days a week.
Wow.
So you become pretty confident at what you're going to deliver, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So whilst we use the equipment and the machine to give us baseline, this is what Porsche want for this car, or this is what BMW want, or this is what Audi want. It's only there as a guideline. You come in asking for a particular car to be used for a particular mode of use, and I can take that requirement and deliver you something back that fits that requirement, rather than what the computer says.
I guess the issue I had when I was speaking to Chris was like, why don't Porsche deliver the cars like this? Because it comes on Cup 2s, but I think from what I heard, the initial factory setup for geometry is not even optimum for the Cup 2s.
Not optimum. The Cup 2s will work at 1.5 degrees, but they're not optimal. Now, the problem with a mass-produced car, and obviously this isn't mass-produced, but they make plenty of them, is that they can't guarantee who's going to buy it. They don't know whether you're going to buy it, whether I'm going to buy it, or whether your great Aunt Fanny or your mother-in-law is going to buy it. So they have to be safe, and they have to look after anybody that might get in this car. And the best way to do that is to make sure predominantly that the front of the car is always limited. so that if you do get into a bit of a scenario, it will always be front axle that gives first. Understeer is easier to manage than oversteer. But as I said before, as long as manufacturers keep making cars in a generic form, we will keep benefiting from being able to turn them into what me, you and everybody else wants.
I mean, I think the thing I noticed the most on the drive we just did is the shims you put in. I think that's the biggest takeaway I've had is this, okay, the lack of fighting, which is obviously the geometry, but the ability to self-center
is a big plus.
Beautiful. Like, for me, that's a real big thing.
Well, we ask everybody to take the car away if you're happy. You'll drive it on roads that you're more familiar with, where you've driven this car previously, and then you'll report back. Because some of today, and we say this to everybody, is placebo. You've seen how the car was before, you've seen me drive it, you've seen the numbers on the screen, you've then seen the numbers on the screen change, and you've seen me drive it. A lot of what's in your head is you wanting to believe it's different. So it's not until you get on roads that you're more familiar with, that you've driven before, that you know where you'll really reap the benefits.
See, I'm smiling because it's like, how often does a business effectively say, I'm selling you a product, but do not take my word for it. You validate your own thoughts on the product, and if you don't like the product, come back to me. Like, it's almost an anti-pattern where you're saying, you're certainly not selling steak oil. You're effectively saying, tell me what you think after you've gone away, because you will be influenced by what's happened today.
Absolutely.
And that just makes me think you've got to be confident in what you do as a business, because you're effectively telling the customers that if they're not happy, to come back.
To come back, absolutely. We say that to everybody. Again, that's not just for you and for the camera. I have treated you today as I did previously, as I would treat every other customer. We've done the same process. You've been through exactly the same. You're going to pay the same amount of money. You've had the same output. Everybody goes through the same process, and it's the process that looks after us. I know that if we stick to that process, the end result is a known quantity, if you know what I mean. So I know that you'll leave, and I know it will be right. I just need for you to go and explore that for yourself.
I just love the fact you're so transparent. I mean, go pop the hood on your Cayman now, check the top mounts, and just see if the positions on the bolts are symmetrical left and right. Mine weren't, and that should be an immediate telltale sign that something is wrong. And this car did have at OPC a full alignment done as part of some other work that was being done, and it came out green. Yet here it came out red. So don't trust what the machine says, because that's dependent on the ramp.
That's why we always drive the car first. So we never ever trust a machine. And in any walk of life, whatever your profession is, if you're an accountant and you use a calculator for all of your sums, you would always common sense check that sum. All we're doing by driving the car previously is working out for ourselves what is wrong with the car. The equipment is just common sense checking what we have found.
Yeah. Actually, I did notice that you always drive it before you get any measurements out.
So as long as it's road registered and it's legal and it's been driven here and the tyres are legal, we will drive every car before we work on it, because you cannot trust a machine.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, you know, if they measured it green and they measured it red, or vice versa, one of them is wrong. How can you guarantee that they're right and they're wrong? That's why we drive it. I found what was wrong with it, and we proved using what we found today that what I found was justified, if you know what I mean. If we'd have measured the car and it had been tending to the right and the steering had been vague and it kicked us at the back at the rear when we hit a bump, and I'd have measured it and gone, well, it's all green, it must be fine, I'd be looking at other things.
Yeah.
So if the geometry was all perfect and it was in the green, yet we'd got a car that did those certain things, and maybe the top mounts were still asymmetric, I'd be looking at other things like tyres. Have you got odd tyres? Have you got a Michelin and a Pirelli? Have you got a PS4S and a Cup 2 and you've not noticed? Is a tyre pressure down? Is a damper faulty? Is a bush wearing out? We always stick to that process because we will always find the problem.
Wow. Well, I have to say, I think the best thing that you, deliver for me and for everybody is whatever car you have, you make it be the best possible version of that car.
For you.
Yeah.
Not for the manufacturer, or not for the next person that's going to buy it. It's your car. You're going to drive it on British A&B roads, spiritedly, why not have a car that does that?
Yeah. Awesome. It's almost like having a second go at the whip and having this car again. You know, I get to rediscover it all over again. So
new car day.
Yeah, indeed.
New
Brilliant.
car day.
Well, I'm going to enjoy this. Get out of their hair. Let these guys go home. I'll get back to Mrs. Revs and get dinner ready and all that kind of stuff. So enjoying life and cars to the max. Thank you, Pete, for all your work on the car, man.
Thank you for bringing her.
Cheers, buddy. There we go. That's amazing. None of the batteries died as well.